With an election looming here in British Columbia in just a few weeks, we've got a debate here. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. In today's episode, we've got a radio debate between the three main party leaders here. David Eby, who's currently in power with the NDP. We've got John Rustad of the Conservatives and Sonia Furstenau of the Green Party. I want to point out a few things before we jump into this. So first off, John Rustad came out with a Rustad rebate. I just want to explain this and compare it to David Eby. This is a $3,000 exemption on any payments you're making to housing, whether that's rent or mortgages. This is an exemption off your BC provincial taxes. So that's a Rustad rebate. He announced this a few weeks ago, and in retaliation, David Eby has come back with a $1,000 tax exemption. Life has been completely unaffordable here in British Columbia for 7 years, and now suddenly less than a month before the election, David Eby is now giving a rebate. So it's a little, yeah, obviously it's just a political tool. And regarding the carbon tax, David Eby is starting to flip-flop now as the election's coming, and he says he wants to remove it as long as Trudeau allows him. John Rustad wants to get rid of the carbon tax, and Sonia doesn't want to get rid of the carbon tax. She thinks it's great. She thinks just crank it up. It's great for the economy. So that gives you a basis of where these people's loyalties lie in the different policies. Without further ado, let's jump into this.
First question is for NDP leader David Eby on affordability and the cost of living. Life has become more expensive over the 7 years your party has been in power. Many are locked out of an unaffordable housing market. Why should voters trust you to improve on this record? You have 1 minute.
Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah, it is challenging out there for families right now. They're facing high interest rates. They're facing the impact of global inflation. They're seeing at the grocery store. You know, it's hard to imagine that the price of food would be a topic in the American presidential debate, but it is. So for us, supporting families, it's about driving down costs wherever we can, whether it's around childcare, providing hundreds of dollars in savings, car insurance, $500 in savings, rebates through Hydro. But it's not enough. We have to do more. That's why we put forward a middle-class tax cut. $500 per taxpayer, about $1,000 for the average family. 90% of British Columbians will benefit right away, unlike Mr. Rustad's proposal, where they got to wait till 2029, collect all their mortgage documents and receipts from landlords in order to benefit from it. People need support right now, not in 2029. And that's what we're all about.
Okay, we have 5 minutes.
That just contradicts his own government. He's the one who's made it this bad.
Now for open debate on this topic, and John Rustad, the Conservative leader, David Eby mentioned you by name. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. And there's no question affordability is the number one topic I hear about everywhere around the province. That's why we came out with the Rustad rebate. That's why our plan for common sense change is going to be there to be able to support families, plus cutting the carbon tax, saving on fuel, and the steps that we're taking on food and food production as well, and making sure food is available locally. David Eby and his government has had 33 different tax increases. And why suddenly now that he wants to do tax cuts? And it doesn't make sense to me. From my perspective, what we need to do is we need to get the red tape out of the way. We need to make sure people's lives have the lightest touch possible from government. We need to make sure that we provide the relief, and we make sure we get our economy going so that wages can improve.
Okay, Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau.
It's so fascinating to me that nobody wants to talk about what's driving unaffordability in this province. Financialized housing. We have real estate investment trusts that have been buying up housing, using it to deliver profits to their shareholders. Fossil fuels, accounting for 1/3 of inflation. These guys want to talk about the carbon tax. That's 1/3% of inflation, but they don't talk about the role that fossil fuels are playing in driving costs. And they want to attach our economy more to this backwards-looking fossil fuel industry. And then they don't talk about profiteering, the fact that companies have been taking tens of billions of dollars in profits in the last 4 years. And they want to sell you a tax cut. I love that David Eby wants to give you back the tax cut that he's taking away with the carbon rebate. So a family of four earning $42,000 gets $1,000 in a carbon rebate. David Eby says, oh, we're going to cancel that, but we'll give you a tax cut back. So I guess one out of one pocket and into the other.
David Eby.
Yeah, what's interesting what she just said there, which I agree about, I've said a lot on the channel. The problem we have with real estate in Canada is we do have a lot of big corporations buying houses, and you got BlackRock, State Street, all these huge mega conglomerates in America buying Canadian houses, renting them back Canadians. It should be illegal for corporations to own houses, period. So I don't know if I'm going to agree with Sonia on very many things in here, but that is one of them.
That's not correct, Sonia. You know that the federal government has a carbon backstop for us, and we can't just get rid of the carbon tax. John Rustad knows that too. You know, I hear John talk about the Rustad rebate. It's the Rustad long wait for British Columbians, 2029 to see relief from John Rustad. For us, the relief is immediate. It's $1,000 for the average household. If you have a multi-generational household, then all of those taxpayers see that tax cut.
David Eby is such a liar. He knows full well that when Pierre Poilievre wins, that carbon tax is still going to be in BC. And John Rustad will get rid of it because he'll be able to get rid of it. But David Eby isn't going to get rid of it. If he wins again, why would he? He loves having all that cash being flushed into the government.
That doesn't happen under his. You have to. In fact, the more you pay for rent, the more you pay for mortgage interest, the more money you get back, which means typically the people with the most money are getting the most back. Our rebate benefits 90% of British Columbians, and the Greens have not put forward support for families.
That's not true. John Rustad's rebate benefits people who are renting or have mortgages, not people who have paid off houses who are going to have the most amount of money. David Eby is just a liar. He's just like a serial liar.
Really.
The one thing that David Eby is saying, and he's misleading once again, which is what weak leaders tend to do. The Rustad rebate starts taking effect on 2026. I would actually love to have the whole thing come in, but we've had such fiscal mismanagement by David Eby running a $9 billion deficit that it's irresponsible to do that. We need to be able to scale this forward so that we can afford to do these things and make sure.
Hold on a second, John. Weren't you just promising a $3.5 billion spend on this? But you're making people wait until 2029. Don't they need the relief right now? Don't families need support immediately?
In 2026, the Rustad rebate starts kicking in and we'll scale up. And as for the carbon tax, it's 36 cents a litre that we will be saving.
I guess that'll give people time to collect their documents from their landlords and apply to
We'll give Sonia first now a chance here. Go ahead.
Absolutely typical framing in an election, which is we're going to give you $1,000 in your pocket, so vote for us, as opposed to we're going to make sure that the healthcare system's working. We're going to make sure that there's transit available. We're going to make sure your kids are going to school in schools that have enough teachers and EAs and supports for them. We're going to make sure that there's mental health available to people when they need it. But instead, every election we get, here's $1,000, and then don't expect services to be there. I think what people want from government is for the services that government should be delivering to be delivered, not more privatization and corporatization of public services, not more corporatization of government, not more of the same of what we've had from both of these two parties. Let's remember, John Rustad was a cabinet minister in Christy Clark's government. They keep doing the same thing, election over election, and 4 years later, BC ends up in the same place of throwing their hands up in the air.
David Eby.
Well, there's lots I agree with Sonia about there. We need strong services in our province. Now is not the time to cut services. Now it's not the time to cut healthcare, John. We need to be supporting British Columbians. Now, hold on. We need to be supporting. We need to be supporting British Columbians with strong services across the province. That's a key part of our commitment to British Columbians. Building schools in cities like Surrey, where John didn't build a single school for the last 4 years he was in government, despite it being the fastest growing city in the province of British Columbia.
Eby talks about building services. You know what's interesting is his drug dens that he's created with all his free drugs that he gives out. There's the vending machines at the emergency centers, emergency hospital entrances, like the one in Nanaimo. They have recently removed that. So if you're not aware, there was a vending machine right outside the emergency entrance for drug paraphernalia that anyone could go and push the buttons, and it teaches you how to use it, how to do drugs. They have recently removed that, probably because the election's coming and they don't like the bad optics because it was going viral on social media.
We're not going to cut hospital projects. We're not going to cut healthcare, unlike John Rustad's proposals.
You want to respond to that?
Sure. Look, David Eby cannot defend his record. He can't defend the damage that he's doing in this province. He's coming out with nothing but lies. We're not cutting healthcare spending. We're increasing healthcare spending. But the reality is 72,500 people left this province last year. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving. 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province. And they're thinking about leaving because David Eby's
John, we're setting population growth records in British Columbia.
Policies that he's brought in this province and the fact that it's unaffordable for people in BC.
Okay, thank you, leaders. We move on to the next question, still with affordability, and this question is to Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau. You are the only leader here today who has promised to keep a consumer carbon tax in place to fight climate change. Touched on this briefly already. Your opponents are backing away from this tax. Why keep this tax in place when life has become so unaffordable for so many? You have 1 minute here.
Yeah, so the tax, if applied well, puts the tax on the cost of pollution and returns that to people. Right now, a family of 4 gets, if they're making less than $42,000, gets $1,000 a year back. That's the way it should work. What the NDP have done in the last 7 years is tinkered with it so much that the biggest polluters get the biggest break on the carbon taxing. 65% of their emissions they don't have to pay for off the top. So we need to make the tax fair, which makes the rebates quite a bit bigger. But nothing is more expensive than ignoring climate change. Just look at 2021. The cost of the atmospheric river, the heat dome, the fires, $17 billion.
This is such fear mongering. They make up these words: atmospheric river, heat dome. I'm so tired of this. These liberal, I was gonna say liberal, yeah, liberal and Green Party. They're just so extreme with this stuff. They make up words you get this out of the news just to scare people.
Dollars to our economy, billions of dollars to rebuild the infrastructure, billions of dollars of lost revenues for people, the cost to farmers, ignoring climate change and continuing to tie ourselves to the fossil fuel industry is incredibly expensive.
Okay, open debate now. John Rustad.
Thank you very much. And one of the things that I do recognize in British Columbia is we do have a crisis, and it is an affordability crisis. And that's why we need to do everything we can to make energy as affordable as possible in British Columbia. Removing the carbon tax alone, along with the low fuel carbon emission standards, according to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, will be about 35.5 cents savings per litre for people. That is real savings. When a mum is taking a child to a soccer, when a family is going to pick up groceries, as people going back and forth work, that is day-to-day savings
That's
that
a
are
real
needed
plan
in this province to help make life affordable.
David Eby.
Sure. I mean, John says he cares about affordability for people. But the one thing that's in his control, the tax cut that he's proposing, the Rustad long wait, you have to wait years to access it. And you have to you have to actually be personally paying the rent or paying interest on a mortgage to benefit from it. Our tax rebate for people, our tax cut year after year, $1,000 for the average household, available for 90% of British Columbians. This is something we can do right now to support families. Not down.
This is so sad. He's just trying to bribe people with this. It's so obvious what he's doing here.
On the road, not if the federal government does this or that, not in 2029. Right now, because people need support right now.
We want to make energy affordable, Mike, in this province. You know what we do? We scale up clean energy. We scale up solar, wind, geothermal. And then we find ourselves in the position that California and Texas find themselves in, where they have so much clean energy that there's negative billing on people's energy bills. Boondoggles like Site C, going to make energy more expensive. And also subsidizing and tying ourselves to the LNG market is going to make energy more expensive for British Columbians. Every jurisdiction that exports LNG sees domestic energy prices go up. These guys are all in on subsidizing an industry that needs billions in taxpayer subsidies to keep itself going, and they are failing to actually get our clean energy economy going, which would make energy more affordable, would make jobs more sustainable, which would make our communities more resilient.
John Rustad.
So it's clear in my mind, and one of the reasons why David Eby doesn't talk about the fact that what he talked about with the carbon tax. First of all, he spent several years defending the carbon tax and attacking any suggestion that we should remove it. And then what he wants to do is increase it for truckers and farmers and industry
John, that's not
as
true.
part of it. And that is what his plan is in terms of how he's going to make up the revenue. What we will be doing in the very first budget you will see is the elimination of both the carbon tax and the low carbon fuel emission standard, and we'll have that scheduled in a way that the federal government does not have an opportunity to bring in their tax, so that people see that real relief that they need in British Columbia.
Give David Eby a chance to respond. What would you do with that carbon tax then?
Well, the reality is that Saskatchewan tried to do that, and they had their money seized from the federal government. They had to go to court. Like, you can't, there's a federal law. But John, here's a big challenge in the room. We should talk about it. I think climate change is real. John Rustad thinks climate science is a hoax. He said it over and over again. When you talk about protecting our communities from climate change, from fire, from flood, supporting our farmers, when you talk about the industries of the future, which are low carbon, things like hydrogen, I agree with Sonia on many points around electricity. And so taking advantage of those opportunities, protecting our communities, recognizing that climate science is real, that the impacts on our communities will accelerate, that is a major piece that should be essential for anyone who wants to be
quick response from John Rustad, and then we have to fit in a very short break.
First of all, the NDP have failed entirely in terms of meeting our energy needs going forward, which is why we're going to do that. The other thing is climate change is real.
Climate science, John,
is having an impact on.
David Eby is just like the biggest poopy pants loser ever. He keeps interrupting. It's so insulting. He's like a pompous, arrogant little prick. He's so annoying to listen to. It just says a lot about his character. He doesn't respect other people.
our climate, there's no
Man.
question. Once again, David Eby refused to talk about his flip-flop on the carbon tax. I get that.
Climate
He's
science,
embarrassed
John,
about
it's a
it.
very
I get
straightforward
that.
question, just like you
But
told the Globe and Mail.
We need to make sure that we're looking after the real crisis in this problem, which is people
Saying,
and
saying you
affordability.
think
funny,
climate
isn't it?
change
That's
is
what we
real
will be
and
focused
scaling
on.
up fossil fuel infrastructure is a circle I'd like to see squared somehow.
All right, leaders, let me jump in there as we take our first very short break. Rustad, the Conservative leader, you have proposed to increase the role of private health care, alarming supporters of public Medicare. Why do you think this would improve the system, and what do you say to people who are concerned about it? You've got 1 minute here.
Thanks very much, Mike. You know, healthcare is an incredibly important issue for people on the province. What we've seen from David Eby is closed ERs, 10 to 12-hour waits in ERs, people not being able to get services. It's been an absolute disaster. Close to 40% of our nurses are now administrators. What we need to be looking at is a different model. We have the second most expensive healthcare model in the top 30 countries in the world, and yet we have the second worst outcomes on many measures. This is why we need to change. We need to look at those models that are successful, the European models, which are universal healthcare, just like we have, delivered simply by government, but it's purchased by government and non-government agencies. And the most important thing is the funding follows the patient. We actually have David Eby, who argued in court essentially saying that the system is more important than patient suffering. I couldn't disagree more. We need to have a healthcare system that is focused on delivering for patients.
David Eby.
Well, this is something that I don't understand, Mike. When the issue, not just in BC, but across Canada, many parts of the world, is a shortage of healthcare professionals. What John is proposing, when families are, it's a stubborn problem, getting the healthcare professionals we need, especially in rural areas. What he's proposing is that we introduce another layer of private companies to hire the same doctors and nurses, presumably at a higher salary, so that now we're paying more for the same health professionals. We need to train more professionals. We need to open that second medical school in Surrey, the one that John Rustad passed over. He had the chance to do it when he was government. He didn't do it. To train those professionals, to get the internationally trained doctors and nurses off the sidelines, to have the incentives in place so that they work across the province. I agree it's a stubborn problem, but we're addressing the family doctor.
He wants to talk about incentives. I have multiple friends who are nurses. They've all gone down to America to be travel nurses. They make way more money. A lot of them didn't want to get that experimental pokey thing, and that forced them out of a job, which is, David Eby is complicit in all of this. He doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. He's just like Justin Trudeau.
Issue. We've got more people connected to a family doctor, 250,000 more people in the province in the last year, and we're turning the corner on that. We can address these issues, but not by introducing a new layer of profit seeking on top. Just doesn't make any sense.
Two things. John doesn't like to talk about the privatization that's happened in provinces across Canada. In Alberta, we've seen total surgeries decrease since they brought in private surgeries. In Quebec, private surgeries are 2 times more expensive than public, and in Ontario, we have illegal and extra billing. But David doesn't want to talk about too much about privatization because we've seen corporatization of healthcare delivery in this province already. Look at TELUS Health. Look at the investigation that had to happen because the BC Greens kept bringing it up in the legislature. They were putting extra billing in front of service of delivery. But we have a higher per capita number of family doctors in BC than the rest of Canada. What we have are doctors not willing to work in a system that is way too heavy on bureaucracy and is not letting it be led by the experts, the healthcare professionals.
John Rustad.
I was talking with somebody from the Dean of UBC just a few weeks ago who said they could have an additional 100 people trained and David Eby and his government won't even talk to them. So there is a real problem here in this province, and it is a government that is not focused on what needs to be done
John,
in this province.
we've added
our healthcare model
a
in
lot
British
of spaces at
Columbia
UBC to train new doctors,
broken.
including residencies.
It is in a crisis.
And a new medical
go
school.
And go to an ER room that is shut down.
Eby is such an arrogant, he's so pompous. He just feels like he can talk over anyone. Rustad's speaking. You got to let the guy speak. Rustad is not interrupting David Eby or Sonia at all. You notice that?
And you have to go 2 hours down the road when you have an emergency.
We proposed
when you
a
have
plan.
A pregnant mother who has been having to be diverted from a hospital in Surrey because they can't get those services. I'm sorry. The system is broken, and we have to be brave enough to say we need to do something
David Eby, your response. Go ahead.
It doesn't make any sense. There's a shortage of healthcare workers. John is proposing introducing private companies to hire the same healthcare workers. How does that? We've got to train up additional healthcare workers to make sure that people get the care they need when they go to the hospital. And John, my wife worked in the interior at hospitals where they stored materials in operating rooms that you closed when you were in government with your massive healthcare cuts. You've had 16 years in government cutting healthcare, and now you want to say, "Oh, don't worry, this time it's different. When you keep putting up numbers that show multi-billion-dollar cuts to the healthcare system, $4 billion in your healthcare plan, and $3 billion
I have to chuckle
and
a little bit
$3
because
billion.
Quick response.
To fix it.
Quick response from John Rustad. Then I want to go to Sonia
Last time
first.
the Conservatives were in power was 1927, so I'm not sure if David Eby was around back then.
Oh,
but
John,
regardless of that,
there's two of
what
us
I
here
wanna
running
look
against
at-
John Rustad's
what I wanna
record,
look
but
at
only one of us
is
isn't
the
John
fact
Rustad.
that our system is broken and that we need those services, and there's only one way to do it.
Okay.
Look at the models that are working in the world and implement them
Okay,
here.
Sonia first now. Go ahead.
So the models that work are community health centres. We have a proposal for the Dogwood model, which would put community health centres in every part of BC. There's already about 30 of these operating in BC. They are really effective ways to deliver team-based healthcare. Teams of doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, social workers, psychologists. Let's add those to MSP, by the way. But the reality is that we have seen a bureaucracy get bigger and bigger under the NDP. And do you know who did get a raise? It was the Deputy Minister of Health, a 6.5% performance bonus in the last fiscal update. We have way too much executive and high bureaucratic costs in this province, and we have to focus on getting the delivery of
Thank you.
healthcare to people.
Thank you, leaders.
Something I want to point out here. So John Rustad, he used to be part of the Liberal Party, and he didn't like the policies and where it was headed. So he left, became independent. Then he left politics, and then he eventually came back as a conservative. Now, Eby keeps trying to grill him as part of the, the Liberal Party and his record. John Rustad was the Minister for Forests and Minerals and what's the official title here? Minister of Forest, Lands and Natural Resources. So why is David Eby trying to pin the Liberals' entire run and power on John Rustad when he wasn't the Minister of Health? It's just ridiculous.
Move on to another question on healthcare directed to David Eby. And many are concerned about the shortage of doctors and nurses, waiting lists for surgery and other services, hospital emergency rooms shutting down across the province. How do you plan to fix this? And you've consistently said that your opponent, John Rustad, plans to cut healthcare dramatically, which he has denied. David Eby, 1 minute.
Thanks, Mike. The key to this is that we have a shortage of healthcare professionals. We had to agree with the premiers across Canada that we wouldn't poach each other's healthcare workers. That's the situation across the country right now. People deserve high quality care no matter where they are in the province. And so training up those extra healthcare professionals, we're training 1,900 nurses. We're recruiting internationally doctors and nurses. We're getting them on track. We have a commitment around immediate provisional licenses for doctors across Canada. But here's the part that I don't understand. How do we recruit more doctors and nurses to this healthcare system? And John, I'm going to ask you this question. You have a candidate on the North Coast. His name is Chris Sankey. He's tweeting out that COVID vaccines cause AIDS. So do you agree with your candidate's do you find that acceptable that your candidate would do that? How would you recruit? And I know, I just want to make sure that you know that this is a real thing. I'm going to pass you a copy of the tweet right there. And how do we recruit the doctors and nurses that we need? If you've got candidates out there that want to sit around the cabinet table, that want to represent their communities, they say that COVID vaccines cause AIDS.
Thank you. Open debate, John Rustad.
Thank you very much. Well, the first thing that we will do, of course, is make sure that we get rid of the mandates and the silly restrictions that have been put in so we can actually hire back our healthcare workers.
Well, that's
there are
already
close
done,
to
John.
10,000 healthcare workers, and it's not done. The mandates that have been brought in place by David Eby, the strict restrictions we brought in will not bring back the healthcare workers. We also, quite frankly, need to get rid of Bill 36, which is extremely draconian on healthcare workers and prevents them from being able to do the job and be the professionals that they're supposed to be. And when we're talking about utilizing our healthcare professionals, there are surgeons today that get 8 hours of surgery time a week. That's it, because that's all the system will allow. They could very easily be doing 20, 30, or 40 hours, and David Eby does not want to utilize those professionals. By changing the model, we're going to have better utilization of professionals, we're going to have better innovation, and we're going to make sure that we're focused on patients.
Okay, Sonia
It's
first.
really
now.
important to look behind what John is suggesting here when he says he wants to unleash the private sector into healthcare and make it a volume-based approach, which means that the doctors and the healthcare providers will be incentivized to spend less time per patient. We need a healthcare system that actually meets the needs of patients. And if we want to ensure that our acute care, our emergency care has the pressure removed from it, we've got to get a primary care system in place so that people know that they have longitudinal primary care with doctors and teams of healthcare providers who are taking care of them and their families, and that they're not finding out that they have stage 4 cancer when their first visit to a hospital is when they get that diagnosis.
The reality
Sonia's
here
making
is-
some
the
good
reality
points
is
here,
very
but hold on a
simple.
second.
Okay,
John.
let's say David Eby here. His turn. Go
Well,
ahead.
I just wonder, John, about who's going to be running our healthcare system. Like, I think about my kid. If my kid gets sick, Do I want to take them to a hospital that's run by a government where a cabinet minister thinks that COVID vaccines cause AIDS? I just want to ask you again, do you find it acceptable that your candidate is promoting the view in the North that COVID vaccines cause AIDS?
So, Mike,
So I'm going to address that here real quick. I was trying to look that up on the side here. Chris Sankey, the Conservative, posted some stuff. I can't find the exact tweet, but basically about a year or so after the World event happened, there was some research that came out that showed that there's some potential that it did affect AIDS and some sort of, I want to restrict a bit of the words I use here. It made the goblins angry in the body. It looked like it could affect AIDS and flare that up. And then a couple years later, now we have multiple research studies show that that isn't true. But so I don't know what tweet he's pulling up. Is it one where he tweeted before the proof came out? It just looks like David Eby is pulling at straws here. Like he is just pulling at any little thing he can to try to make Rustad look bad. It's so embarrassing. Eby needs to learn how to actually speak to people. He's such an arrogant man. Just on that alone, why would you want to have that guy in power? A pompous jerk running the country. He thinks he's so high and mighty. It's just so obnoxious listening to this radio interview with David Eby interrupting. Sonia interrupts a lot too. But, you know, that's what you get with Green. It's just this high and mighty arrogance of, oh, we know better, we know better.
the question was around doctors and wait lists and improving healthcare. And so I will answer
is that
your question.
That must
Well, it's an open debate. You can respond to his question.
I understand that. But when you're looking at it, and this is what David Eby does not understand, the models that are in Europe, Scandinavian countries, European countries, Switzerland, Australia, they are far superior doing what I am suggesting. They're far superior to what we're doing. You've got a government.
Will Chris
and
Sankey
David Eby,
sit around the
you've got a
cabinet table, John?
government,
Will he be the
and
health minister?
You've got a government
Will he
that
be on a health
is
committee?
arguing that his system is more important than patient suffering. I couldn't disagree more. We want to put a system in place from the European models that are far superior, that do much better than what we're doing here in British Columbia, and are focused on patients, making sure that the funding and support
There
follows the
couldn't be an
patient.
easier question, Mike. Do you
I'm
think that
super
COVID
excited.
vaccines
David
cause
Eby does
AIDS?
not want to talk
they don't
about
cause
the
AIDS.
disastrous
I don't agree
effects
with
of
that.
British
I don't support
Columbia
that
and his
candidate.
policies, the ER
It's
culture,
very
and the
straightforward.
fact that our healthcare system is
be
collapsed.
easier.
He is trying to divert from that, and I get that because he can't defend it, and that's what weak leadership does.
A quick final word to Sonia first, and now we take a
to
break.
ask the question about the people that are standing up to be representatives in our communities. Camille Curry, who's our candidate in Esquimalt-Colwood, she led the charge on Everybody Deserves a Family Doctor. She got an award from Doctors of BC for the work she did on behalf of doctors and patients in this province. That's the kind of candidate that we're bringing forward. We're bringing forward serious people who have demonstrated that they can make change happen. There is a problem with the candidates in the Conservative slate.
Okay, at that point, leaders, we take another short break. Now to crime, public safety, mental illness, and the toxic drug crisis. And the question is to Conservative leader John Rustad. You have promised to shut down supervised drug consumption sites and stop decriminalization of drug possession. Your critics say that would only make the crisis worse. What do you say to them? You have 1 minute here.
So it's pretty clear in British Columbia that the addictions and overdose deaths is completely out of control. I was up in Campbell River not long ago, and there was a monument there with one blue flag planted in the ground for every boy and man who has lost their life to an addiction. 12,000 flags. And there are more being added every day. And that doesn't include the women who have also died from addictions. What is happening in British Columbia is clearly not working. We need a bold and brave plan, which is what the Conservatives will do, take a common sense approach to being able to deliver addiction and addiction treatment in British Columbia to bring this to an end. When I hear from a mom like Nikki, who for years tried to get a hold of NDP, tried to get a hold of her NDP MLAs and refused getting a response, and her son Christian died because he could not get the treatment, and she felt helpless because there was nothing she could do to help him. This has to change, and a Conservative government will change it.
Okay, we get a response from the NDP leader, David Eby.
Yeah, for Nikki, for all of the parents, for all of the people who have lost a loved one to the toxic drug crisis, absolutely. People need access to treatment. They need access to a way out of addiction that will kill them.
And EB's solution is to provide vending machines outside of hospitals where they even teach you how to do the drugs.
And that's why we've opened hundreds of new addiction beds. We've got more work to do on this. And the thing that I struggle with is, John, this is a really serious crisis. Mm-hmm. How can it be that you say one thing to one group about it when you're in Richmond talking to the Chinese community, say we're going to close all of the safe consumption sites. But then, when you're talking to someone in recovery who says, my life was saved 5 times, Guy, right? My life was saved 5 times by a safe consumption site, and I was able to get into recovery as a result. You say to him, well, we're not actually going to close them. We're just going to change the name. And then you send out Eleanor Sturko who says, well, we're not actually going to close them. So, people deserve better on this serious issue.
Do you want to clarify your position on it?
Sure. Look, very clearly, safe supply and decriminalization have failed people in this province. They do not work. They are getting drugs in the streets. That safe supply is making its way into our schools.
He's dodging the question again.
Experts are telling me that we have the highest level of addicts per capita anywhere in North America.
How do we not know your position on safe consumption sites, John?
And I can tell you something. What we are doing is we're going to turn anything like safe consumption sites into recovery intake sites.
So you're not
We're going to
closing
make
them.
sure that we are
That's
going
good
to
to be
be
clear.
linking people to the recovery that's needed, and we're going to end this nonsense that's happening in British Columbia.
Sonia, first now.
That overdose prevention sites are actually where people get attached to services. It is where they are getting.
Is this a debate between 3 leaders? Is it just 3 people ganging up on John Rustad? The guy can't even speak. They keep speaking over him.
Attached to healthcare services, to social services.
Waiting 5 months to get services.
The challenge here that is being ignored is, like, John likes to talk about European countries, but he doesn't talk about the European countries that recognize from the evidence and the experts that a war on drugs is not going to get us. We could follow the path of Mexico or the UK. Wars on drugs, we know what they get us: bigger cartels, more organized crime. What we need is a war on poverty. What we need is to recognize that the socioeconomic conditions that are creating these outcomes are exacerbated by this highly toxic drug supply. We need grown-ups in the room. We had an all-party health committee that spent a year listening to experts, getting information from everything from police to health experts to people with lived experience. We presented a report to the government, consensus from all 3 parties on the path forward, and the number 1 recommendation was make sure that people's basic needs are being met, look at a continuum of care from prevention all the way to treatment, and all John wants to talk about is the very furthest end. The most expensive thing to do is put people into involuntary care. Let's have a voluntary care system. Let's make sure people are getting help before they're in crisis. Let's make sure there's mental health help for students, for people. We have so much work to do, but the focus on the...
Sonia, the Green leader here, is inspiring no one. Like, what policies are she offering that makes this place better? Like, nothing. Just increasing the carbon tax. That's what she's all about. Just make our life more miserable.
Most severe end of this crisis is ignoring the whole continuum.
Okay, both of your opponents have expressed support for secure and voluntary care. Let me go to David Eby on that point. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Mike, British Columbians can see people struggling in our streets who they're not living a life that has any dignity. They're walking barefoot down the street, smashing windows. They're in visible distress. They're mentally ill and brain injured. We tried supportive housing. It didn't work. We tried something called complex care housing with intensive medical supports. They weren't successful. They were threatening staff, other people. In hospital, they're using drugs. We need something that works for these folks. We have a model that works, there are a couple hundred of these folks across the province. They need that care, so that's why we're opening those facilities in Maple Ridge. We're providing support for people.
John Rustad.
So first of all, he's going to take hospital beds which desperately needed and turn them into... We need to be building additional capacity in this province. And this is also why I look at involuntary care from a perspective. If you're a parent and you have an 11-year-old child who is addicted, today, if that child does not want to go into treatment and recovery, there's nothing you can do as a parent. And I think that is wrong. We in British Columbia should be allowing parents to be able to do everything they can to help their child. That's why we are proposing compassionate and voluntary care. The opportunity for a parent to say, I want to do everything I can for my child. Let's make sure they get into treatment and recovery so that they can live full and productive lives in this province.
With that idea? Kids absolutely need support, and it's a challenging issue, right? Because if you have a kid...
So he doesn't agree.
John, don't pretend this issue is straightforward and simple. It's not. It's challenging. When you have a kid who's with another group of kids and someone appears to have an overdose, the decision about whether or not to call 911 for help might hinge on what they think the response is going to be.
And so
considering the gray in this, considering the challenge around this is important.
For Nikki, whose son, Christian, who died of an overdose, in grade 9, the teachers knew he had an addiction problem and would not tell the parents would not inform the parents of this problem.
they
I think that's
absolutely should have
completely
told the
wrong.
parents.
That's just so disgraceful. I'm with John on that 100%. That is disgraceful. The parents, they should, it be mandatory they tell the parents that that's going on, and then the parent can say, I want my kid put into this institution. They don't get to decide because the parent is the one who's raising the child. They get to choose. There's a serious problem in our country here, and it's David Eby is the head of the snake.
Thank you, leaders. We move on to the next question, which is to you, Sonia, first now, and it is on a similar topic.
Yeah.
On the drug crisis, you have promised to expand harm reduction services, including prescribing fentanyl for drug users. You've criticized your opponent's call for more involuntary secure care for people suffering from mental illness. How would you implement this plan while ensuring public safety, which is a key concern?
Not prescribing fentanyl. So regulated pharmaceutical alternatives to the incredibly toxic and dangerous drug
Including
supply.
fentanyl, though, right?
Well, diacetylmorphine is actually what we specifically talk about in our platform. But let's be clear. Right now, there is a multi-billion-dollar illegal industry. Organized crime is operating in our streets, is distributing to people drugs that kill them. It is causing the brain injuries that David Eby talks about. If we want to look at solutions, let's look at Duncan, the Village Project, which I have had to fight over and over again to make sure that BC Housing continues their funding of this. You have people getting housed who have been homeless. You have people getting services who have been using substances. You have people getting employment opportunities and people moving back into lives with dignity and agency. There is a model that works. It's a lot less expensive than what's being proposed, and there's evidence to back it up. The challenge with involuntary care, as the evidence tells us, is we've got about a 3.5% success rate. So government's spending a lot of money on approaches that evidence show us are going to fail. Is government spending money on things that aren't going to work? Let's spend it on things that work, like the Village Project that has been proven to be successful.
Thank you. Open debate now. The question was about public safety as well. John Rustad, your thoughts?
Public safety is a huge issue, and we'll deal with the free drug supply and the fact that government has become one of the largest drug dealers in this province. But when it comes to public safety, look, we have a problem with 20% of the people committing crimes are committing 80% of the crimes. There are no consequences. They're being rotated back out onto the street. This has to change in British Columbia. When you have every business in the province that's now having to have security guards come in because there is no consequences and criminals are being emboldened, that to me is wrong. That's why we're actually going to push not just for bail reform, we're going to be pushing for court reform in terms of being able to get these people through the court system much faster, and we're going to be pushing for guaranteed minimum sentencing. These people need to be taken off our streets.
John will find no disagreement from me about repeat offenders. There are people who are too dangerous to be in community. They need to be in custody. But where you will find some disagreement with me and where he faced a serious credibility problem was his response to a journalist question last week about gun control. The journalist said, are you going to make sure that British Columbia enforces federal gun rules restricting handguns and semi-automatic rifles? And John said, no. I'm going to direct police not to put any resources into enforcing federal gun control rules. Well, that doesn't make our community safe.
What he actually said was he's not going to direct any provincial resources to do that. So he was allowing it to say if Trudeau wants to send federal resources to take people's guns, but he's not going to waste provincial resources on taking away people's, guns. The hunters, the sports shooters, the fishermen who are out there in the bush. He's not wasting our money taking away people's guns who are just going and doing that stuff. Those aren't the people going into the banks or robbing people's cars and all the crime that's going on in our cities. David Eby is an absolute loser. He's a disgrace to this province.
It has nothing to do with hunting. It is all about pandering to a small constituency, which is so small, I think is invisible, in order to, and it makes our communities less safe.
Okay, John Rustad,
what do you say to
response.
people in Surrey or in Richmond about semi-automatic guns and handguns and directing the police not to enforce those rules?
You want to talk about gun control?
Yes, I do.
Here's a big issue.
That is so ridiculous. He's not talking about the gangsters in Surrey with the machine guns. Well, David Eby is just the biggest bonehead ever.
David Eby is refusing to even put any forces, any police efforts towards actually stopping guns from coming into, illegal guns from coming into this province through our ports. We propose to put out a police force that is going to be focused on the criminal activities, the potential criminal activities that are happening in our ports, and their response
John,
was, that's federal. That's a federal issue. We're not going to worry about that. I'm sorry, that's a provincial issue. When these guns and drugs and organized crime is happening in our streets and happening in these communities, we need to do everything we can to lock down on that, which is why we...
You notice how when John puts forward a new idea, David Eby just laughs and he just scoffs at it and just mumbles over it, so it's hard for people to hear him. This is the kind of guy we have running our province here. He doesn't respect anyone else. He thinks he's the top king. He thinks he's number one captain narcissist. He's just like Justin Trudeau. He is really no different than Justin Trudeau at all.
But to the point that he made to you, though, would you enforce federal gun restrictions?
So, look, there are law-abiding gun owners in this province that are being targeted by the federal government, and I disagree with that. And so I will not see our precious dollars that are being spent on law enforcement going after law-abiding guns. Instead, I will have them going after the criminals, going after the gangs, going after the source of these guns coming into our province.
Okay, Sonia, first to now.
He will see our precious dollars going to all sorts of for-profit industries that can't actually deliver what they want to, what we should be succeeding. The focus here is so much on the worst end of the crisis, and what we hear so little from both of these leaders is how we're going to prevent these crises from getting worse, how we're going to move upstream to respond to the cuts that came under the BC Liberals that have now created these deepening poverty and inequality in our province, to respond to the fact that much of what's happened especially the last 4 years has been a continuation of the status quo. We actually should be trying to prevent the lack of mental health access for young people. If we want young people to have better mental health, let's get counselors in schools. Let's make sure we have psychologists in schools.
Quick response.
Yeah, prevention is certainly important.
In my mind that we need to be expanding mental health services. We need to have mental health clinics and services expanded, especially throughout rural BC.
Under MSP?
We need to make sure, quite frankly, that we build out everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term treatment and recovery to longer-term recovery. There's more that needs to be done around making sure that we're treating people with addictions as well as with mental health issues.
Final comment for David Eby. We fit in a final break here. Go ahead.
I just find it astonishing that someone who says that public safety is a priority would take that vital tool away from police to enforce federal gun regulations against gangsters in our province. Police are lining up to say it's an absurd proposal.
He wants to go after
handguns, John. Are you hunting deer with handguns? With semi-automatic rifles? This isn't about hunting.
We want to go after criminals and crime, which is what, quite frankly, the guy who wrote the book on how to
I know why you don't want to let me talk. I let you talk.
For the listeners, so you don't talk over each other, just finish your thought, please.
Police are lining up to...
David Eby, I let you talk. No, you haven't. Not once have you let John talk. John is not talking about the handguns and the machine guns. He's talking about the hunters out there with the rifles. He doesn't want police going and taking those away because it's a stupid Trudeau policy. It's so stupid that Trudeau hasn't even enforced his own policy. And you got little lapdog here, David Eby, trying to do Trudeau's bidding here. It's embarrassing.
Say it is absurd that you would take that tool away from them that they use to enforce the law against gangsters and trafficking guns.
So look, we have a premier who actually wrote the book entitled How to Sue the Police. You cannot take his advice on how to tackle crime. We're going to go after the gangs. We're going to go after the guns. We're going to go after the source. We're going to make sure that our ports are no longer sieves for this stuff coming into British Columbia.
Despite all announcements to the contrary, John.
Thank you, leaders. We fit in one final short break. Move on to Indigenous relations now. And to John Rustad, the Conservative leader, you have suggested that you would repeal Indigenous rights laws in British Columbia, notably the UN Declaration passed unanimously by the BC legislature. If it was so bad for BC, why did you vote for it to become law in BC? 1 minute.
So what British Columbia needs in this province is economic reconciliation. What is currently happening is actually causing friction between people. We need to make sure that we are focused on having First Nations engaged in the economy to their fullest extent. Dr. Joseph Gosnell had a vision when he was the father of the Nisga'a Treaty, and I think it should be applied across the province, which is it's high time that First Nations have the opportunity to not only catch up economically, but if possible, surpass. And you do that by adding to the economy, not by taking from one group to give to another. And it's a big piece that we need to be doing in this province. We also need to be returning children to First Nations, having First Nations community in charge of actually doing their own children and youth care around that. And we need to be working with First Nations on addictions and addiction treatment and building out capacity there. So these are the things that we need to do, and what we will continue to use UNDRIP as it was intended, as it was debated in the United Nations, as a guiding principle for our work with First Nations. However, when we have legislation that is creating problems, we will remove it, and we'll make sure that legislation is put in place that actually works for all British Columbians.
Open debate now. David Eby.
Well, for British Columbians, they understand that dividing ourselves and finding wedges between communities doesn't make us more prosperous, doesn't make communities more successful. Some of the biggest and most successful projects in our province, economic projects that are creating jobs across all communities, are partnerships with Indigenous people. And to take this moment to announce actually on Truth and Reconciliation Day that, John, that you would repeal a law that just recognizes the rights that Indigenous people have. It sets us back to the approach they used to take when you were in government, when you were a minister, when you lost the biggest land claim case in the history of Canada with the Chilcotin, a 10-year court battle. It threw uncertainty.
Under the NDP
it threw
in the 90s.
uncertainty. John, just let me finish. Threw uncertainty into the land base. And then at the end of spending all that money on lawyers and fighting them all the way through, the court still says you have to sit down and figure things out with them. We're still cleaning up your mess from that. And so working with Indigenous people, we've got equity programs to support them in participating in projects on the land base, finding ways for communities to work together. We have to do things differently. And that will bring success for our province.
Sonia, first to now.
Yeah, I think David brings up a really important point that John wants to ignore, which is that the courts have been incredibly clear with governments, which is you need to sort out the fact that rights and title exists. And that if you're not going to sort it out, you're going to lose in court again and again as a government. If you're fighting against the inherent rights and titles that the courts have declared are there, you're going to spend a lot of taxpayer money to go into court and fight a battle that you're going to lose. Instead, the approach has to be negotiating at a table, working with First Nations, recognizing that rights and title have been declared by the courts, and moving forward in a mature and responsible way, not just in terms of the work with First Nations, but on behalf of the people of BC and on behalf of businesses. There is no greater uncertainty that can be wrought than what happens in this province when these two parties switch back and forth. One comes in, they do a whole bunch of things, the other one comes in, undoes it all, starts again, and business and the people of BC have nothing but uncertainty, election after election, because we've got this swing back and forth. We need long-term thinking, consistency, and when it comes to reconciliation, Indigenous rights, the courts have made it abundantly clear.
Quick reply from John Russell.
Thank you for that. There's a reason I signed 435 agreements in BC, because I believe very strongly in reconciliation. I believe very strongly in Indigenous rights, which includes title.
Why
we
so
need to work through
then?
and actually address that, and we do that through economic reconciliation. But very quickly, I would just ask David Eby, what is it that was about the Lands Act change last spring that you proposed that you decided to shelf and not do until after the election?
Oh, John.
David Eby.
I mean, this is classic. I never know which John Rustad I'm dealing with. So when we did the Haida agreement, he looked into the eyes of the Haida elders that came to the legislature.
From the question again.
John, you asked me a question.
Yes, the Lands Act.
John, so come on, man. So look in the eyes of the elders. You don't want to hear this story because you know it's embarrassing. You looked in the eyes of the elders and you said this is important. Government can't win a court case against the Haida. I'm glad this happened. And then you walked out of the legislature and started tweeting about how the Haida were coming for people's backyards. And it's exactly the same approach that caused fear and confusion about the Land Act, and it was causing disruption. And so we pulled it because it wasn't working. We're not going to bring it back. We're going to make sure that we're addressing concerns and working together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, to solve problems. But your approach to use social media to say one thing to the elders, look in their eyes and say, yeah, you could win in court, and then go out and try to stir up fears on social media.
He was going to get the Lands Act done by the end of April, and then he said, no, we're going to pull it and we'll do it after the election. When it comes to Haida, I fully support Haida. That's what your own words were in the legislature, okay?
That's what my words are right here.
when it comes to Haida, I fully support Haida title, but title should never have been identified underneath private land and infrastructure. That creates too much of a conflict that cannot happen.
Very quickly, Sonia, first now.
Yeah, fomenting fear and misinformation is something that John and the Conservatives want to do in this election and pit people against each other. What we want is responsible governance that is straightforward, that is working with evidence and information, that is consistent on where they stand, that they don't say one thing and do the other or say different things.
Sonia is just a little EB bootlicker. This is just like a 3-on-1 gang up here.
On different days. We need responsible, forward-looking governance that recognizes where we are in terms of our legal responsibilities and our responsibilities around reconciliation. And John is all over the place.
Thank you, leaders. We move on to a new question.
Why are they giving Sonia an equal amount of time to talk? She doesn't represent an equal proportion. If you look at the polls, it's like 45% for the Conservatives, 43% for NDP. That puts the Greens at like next to nothing.
This is to David Eby. On the negative nature of the campaign that we've seen so far in this election, you've portrayed your opponent, John Rustad, as extreme and dangerous for his comments on vaccines and climate change. This has come up during the debate this morning already. Why should voters care about those comments when there are very many other pressing issues here in this campaign? Your thoughts?
Well, thanks, Mike. Let's take healthcare. Just one thing. People want their hospitals to work well. They want their healthcare system to work well. John's bringing people to this election, like Chris Sankey. You won't even condemn Chris Sankey saying that the COVID vaccine causes AIDS. Like, when you can't even bring yourself to say that that's problematic and you don't agree with that, then how are you going to run a healthcare system? I wouldn't trust John Rustad to run my Thanksgiving dinner conversation or with the family, let alone a hospital where my kids have to be safe.
Are they really safe, though, when there's drug paraphernalia, vending machines right outside the hospital, quite literally outside the door? David Eby is such a hypocrite, and he's such a pompous, smug prick.
Parents and grandparents have to be safe. I mean, this is like incredibly bizarre, and bizarre in a way that compromises safety. To say you're not going to enforce federal handgun rules because actually I struggle to know why. And so, it makes our communities less safe in terms of a crime and public safety perspective. It makes our communities less safe in terms of how our healthcare system is run. Will Mr. Sankey be the health minister? Will he be on a health committee? And does John actually fundamentally, at the end of the day, agree with Mr. Sankey's views?
Open debate, John Rustad. Go ahead.
I like how he attacks Indigenous Canada, but you asked the question about the negative nature.
Whoa, John. Whoa, wow.
So, please, I'm
what
speaking,
about Mr.
Mr.
Sankey's
Eby, will you
views?
allow me to speak, please? Thank you. Look, the reality is this. People are dying on our streets from drugs. People are dying on our streets from crime. Our healthcare system is in collapsing and in crisis. People are having an affordability crisis. Our economy is in shambles. Our resource sector is being destroyed. We've got a budget problem. We have so many issues that need to be debated. And David Eby only wants to go negative. And I get that, because he can't defend his record. He can't defend what he's doing. He cannot defend it. So that's what a weak leader does, is they just go on. That's that.
Well, these two are battling it out. I think what British Columbians want out of this election is a vision for the future of this province. And we've put forward a very serious vision, a vision that looks at how do we measure government in an effective way that ensures that government is delivering the services that people should rely on to keep people healthy, to keep communities healthy, to keep our natural world healthy, and to make sure that our government is capable. One of the things that I think people are so disappointed with is we've had all these big announcements. We're spending $100 million here, $200 million there, $1 billion here, and we're not seeing the outcomes that we should expect from government. And so David does have a responsibility to acknowledge and recognize the frustration that people feel and how deep that is. It's so deep that they're turning to somebody that is using Twitter and conspiracy theorists to guide them in their decision and policy making. This is a very worrisome place for British Columbia.
No, because Twitter is the only place with free speech. Sonia just seems to be very much a paid off shill. Twitter is the only place you can actually post stuff and it won't get censored. I wouldn't be surprised if she's fully in bed with the media companies because of that response right there.
I'd say at this point, don't give all the power to either of them. Make the legislature a place where people have to sit down at the table, work together, and focus on the people of British Columbia.
David Eby.
Well, there's lots that I agree with Sonia about. People are frustrated out there, and rightly so. They're facing huge cost of living pressures. And these challenges that we face, they're really hard problems. And we're just starting to turn the corner. Rents are just starting to come down in British Columbia while they're going up in the rest of Canada because we're building 4 times more rental housing than Ontario. Now's not the time to stop. For John Rustad to say government doesn't have a role to play in delivering affordable housing. That's fundamentally wrong. It's challenges like this that drive me. This is why I'm doing this work, is to make sure that British Columbians get support on these big challenges. John wants to leave people on their own. He wants to cut healthcare. He wants to abandon the field on affordable housing, turn people over to speculators.
It's
completely wrong.
John Rustad.
I think British Columbia doesn't want a premier who's so easily to lie. And I think that is just bad. I hate using that word, but it's very true.
You think everybody lies.
About
Climate scientists,
but I'll tell you this, what
Bonnie
we are
Henry,
focused on,
vaccine makers.
What we are focused on is making sure that life can be affordable. What we're focusing on is bringing common sense change, just getting back to the basics of looking after people. David Eby seems to think that $3,700 a month downtown Vancouver for a two-bedroom apartment is affordable. It's not. This is why we put in the Rustad rebate, to be able to help with rent and with mortgages.
Property prices
and
up.
it's also why we're doing everything we can to reduce those cost structures and being positive for people in BC.
So we have 30 seconds left in the debate. Sonia Furstenau, you get the last word here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, again, we have to look at what are the conditions that got us here. 40 years ago, government started saying, hey, you're on your own. We adopted this very neoliberal approach to things. What we need are governments that can effectively deliver services that people rely on, make sure that those foundations are there so that businesses can have certainty, so that people can have certainty, so that we can thrive. And that's investments in the services that government should be delivering. That's what we are focused on.
That brings our debate to an end, and I want to thank the three-party leaders for doing this today. NDP leader David Eby, Conservative leader John Rustad, Green leader Sonia Furstenau, for a vigorous and informative debate. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being here today. If we can end on a high note, I'm sure you'd all agree on one thing. We disagreed on a lot, but I think we can all agree. Make sure you register and vote on or before October.
So there we have it. There's the debate. It's embarrassing. I mean, Sonia and David Eby clearly are tied together there. Just dogpiling on Rustad because Conservatives are going up in numbers. David Eby had nothing there. He had absolutely nothing. He's talking about the gun laws and the Twitter, and someone sent a tweet out 4 years ago, and now that science has been disproven. Like, it's pathetic. David Eby, as Rustad said, he's attacking him because he's got nothing. He's a weak leader. David Eby's got to go. I don't know why people like this guy. He's a smug prick. He's pompous. He's arrogant. Clearly doesn't have respect for other people. He thinks he's better than everyone. He's just like Justin Trudeau. He's just the provincial version of Justin Trudeau with a different colored banner. Let me know what you guys thought about this down below. This is a little bit of a different episode because it was podcast style. So be sure to subscribe here over on my second channel. We're going to keep fighting for freedom. I'll see you guys in the next one.